Hi, and welcome to the 9th part of this DCP Web HTML5 and CSS beginners tutorial. In this tutorial, we'll focus on building forms using form processing. So, let's open up our web browser and let's open up Notepad++, and we'll drag our web browser to the left and we'll have Notepad++ on the right. Now, you should really see the code that you wrote before already in Notepad++. If you don't, and you just see a blank window, then you can open up this folder that you created before and drag and drop the file into Google Chrome first so you can see your code, and then drag and drop it into Notepad++. Now we can see the code and the web page side by side. Okay, let's scroll down to the bottom, and in the last video we created this image. Well, we didn't create the image, we downloaded this image and we put it into the web page here using this particular tag. And the next thing we want to do is create a horizontal rule, because that will allow us to separate the next bit of code we're going to write. And before we actually start writing any code, let's have a look at a typical example, right? So I'm going to my website, I'm going to go to portfolio here, and you can click on any one of these. We'll click on this one, and as we scroll down you'll see get your free quote today, and we see this form here with these checkbox options, so you can check them off. There's a drop down menu here, there's a comment box, name, email and phone number. So let's build something similar to this, not exactly the same but something like this. So we're going to write the basic code for this. Let's just go back to this tab here. We'll leave this open for reference, but we'll go back to this tab. And what are we building? We're building a form, right? So in our code, the first thing we want to put in there is a form. We want to make a form. Let's put a form tag in. And what you'll notice is with like HTML and most coding languages, when you want something, it's normally going to be named. If you want a form, then it's going to be called a form. If you want a horizontal rule, then it's going to be called a HR. If you want an unordered list, it's going to be an OL, unordered and list, and a list item. So a lot of the things are named. This is unordered list, UL. Then you've got like P for paragraph, you've got header 1 tag, you've got strong for bold, and EM for emphasize, and there's all these different tags. There's lots and lots and lots of them, but most of the tags are going to be named something logical, so it's easy for you to remember. So this is the form tag. So let's go ahead and save this. Now if you notice, when you type something in, this is going to be red here. This means it isn't saved yet. So you need to click the save button or press Ctrl S, and then you can come over to your browser and refresh. And when you refresh, you'll notice nothing will happen. So let's do one thing. Above this form, let's type in P for paragraph. And in fact, no, let's not do that. Let's do a H2 tag. Let's make a proper heading for this, a H2. And in this H2 tag, we're going to call this get a free quote. And now when we save it and we refresh, we'll see get a free quote. Now we used H2 tag because if you remember at the beginning we used a H1, and normally H1 you only ever use once on a page, but you can use many H2 and many H3 and H4 tags all the way up to H6. So you may have many H2 tags, but we normally only ever use one H1 tag. So down here, let's go back to this form. We've got please enter your name. So let's do something like we're going to put out, for now we're going to put our fields in a paragraph. Yeah. Later we'll use, in later tutorials when we start to use CSS, we won't need these paragraph tags here. We can use other tags that will help us to control how this form looks. For now, all we want to do is build a basic form, and then later in future tutorials when we get to CSS, we'll be able to actually manipulate how that form looks using CSS, right? So for now, let's just do the basic stuff. So what do we want? Let's try and do this a bit different, right? So we want first name, and what is this? This is an input, right? It's an import field. So we're going to say over here, we want an input, and we need to tell it what type it is. So the type will be a text type. So when we refresh this now, we'll have first name, and the import field here. So we want another tag, right? Or another field. And we want, let's do last name. Import type equals text. Now, if I don't save this and I refresh, I'm not going to see anything change here. So make sure you save it, and then make sure you refresh it, and then you're going to see the second tag here, or the second field, first name and last name. People can type in here now their first name and last name. Now, what else do we want? So we're asking for a customer to get a free quote. So in order to get that free quote, we need to be able to contact them, right? So we want to get their email address, and that will be an import type, and the type will be text. Let's close this paragraph here. So now we've got an email address. I know it doesn't look very nice, the layout. Like I mentioned, later we'll use CSS to make this look more presentable. But there's a second type of text field here for this email address. There's actually one called email. And when we refresh, you'll see there's not much change. But when we use this type called email, it will actually do some basic validation on this field to make sure the customer has typed in the email address correctly. So if they type in info space at whatever it is .com, it will flag this. When they try to submit it, it will say, sorry, this is an invalid field. Yeah. So it will do some basic validation for us on this field. Now, it's great having the customer's email, but wouldn't it be nice if we have their phone number? So we do tel number for telephone number, and it will be an import type. And this can just be a normal text type. Now we can ask them for their telephone number. So we're starting to gather some information together. Got the first name, last name, email, telephone number, kind of similar to what I have on my own website. Bit different, but it doesn't matter. We're just learning the fields. The purpose of this is to learn what these fields are and how they work. And the next thing we want to do, let's have a think. Let's imagine that we want our customer to select a service, right? So the first thing we should really do is tell them what we're asking them for. So let's say to them, please select a service, and let's make this strong. If you remember from our last tutorial, strong will make it bold, right? We used that right here before. So when we scroll up, we'll see strong here, which makes it bold here. And we're asking them to select a service, so now we need to give them something to select from. So in this case, we want to do something a bit like this, these checkboxes, right? I'll only do a few, but we can do, you know, it says other services required, but here we've got these checkboxes. So here we have, please select a service, and underneath we'll do a paragraph tag. And what do we want? We want to do, let's say we want them to, so I'll do it for my own business, right? So website design will be one service. And I'm going to copy this and paste it down. And the other service will be graphic designer. I'm just going to do 2 examples for now, but you could have as many services as you want. And we need some way of them selecting this service, right? So input type equals checkbox. This is a different type now. Now, if it was me, I would just copy this and paste it right here. But my advice to you is to type all of this in and constantly type it in. Keep typing it in, because every time you type it in, you're going to get like, you're going to just memorize this stuff. It'll be like on the back of your hand. It may seem overwhelming now, all of these different tags and what do they all mean and how do they all work, but the more you type it in, the more you're going to memorize it, and it's going to become like second nature to you to type these things in. So try and type these things in wherever possible, rather than just cutting and pasting, because you're going to forget quite quickly when you cut and paste. But you want to memorize these things, and the only way you're going to do that is the hard way, and that's just to type it in all the time. Now we've got checkboxes here, and they can tick one or the other, or they can tick both. So now when the customer fills out this form, they'll submit the form, and we'll get their first name, last name, email, telephone number, and we'll get these the option as to what they want. So when we call them later, we can say, okay, you filled out this form and you want website design, please tell me what you need, or you need graphic design, and so forth. In my example on my site, I've got quite a few different ones, but the same logic applies. All I'll do is just copy this down multiple times and rename it to the relevant service. So let's see what else we can do. I'm sure there's some other things we can do here, right? So maybe we want to ask the customer something like, let's do a paragraph tag, and we'll do a closing one, and we'll ask the customer, what is your budget? So let's ask them what their budget is, right? And maybe we will, in this case, let's do a let's make a drop down menu for this budget. So we'll have something like this, but with prices inside in a drop down menu. So you can see I'm doing an indentation now, yeah? So when I want to lay out code a bit more clean, so this is all pretty good, right? But then here I want to indent, so I'm going to use the tab key to do some indentation, and here I'm going to do a select option. So we'll do select here, we'll go down a few lines, we'll tab in. So when I'm tabbing, we're using the tab key right here, this key here, and this just allows me to indent the code so I can read it later a lot clearer. It's better this way. If all the code is just in one flat line, then it's very hard to read, but when you've indented it like this, it makes more sense later. When you want to read it, it will be easier for you to read. So what we'll do is in here we want to have some options, right? So we're going to do an option tag, and we want to close that option tag, and we want a few different options. So I'm going to select this. Again, I would advise you type these in manually. Just want to speed this tutorial up a little bit. We want to say from £1, from £0 to 100. That's the budget. We'll copy this and paste it down, and we'll say from 100 to 200, and then we'll paste it one more time, and we'll say from 200 to 500, and then we'll do from 500 to 1000. And let's save this. Let's go over here and refresh it. Now we've got a drop down menu here. Really, the drop down menu should show the data below, but because that's where the page ends, it's showing it above. But that's fine. When we add more fields below, it will show as a drop down going downwards rather than upwards. We'll see that in a moment. But this title, you can see this one's bold. We want to make this one bold as well. So let's do a strong. Now it's bold. Okay, so underneath this select tag, this is the closing select tag. We want to do, let's think, what else can we do? It'll be nice if the customer selects website design or graphic design. It would be nice to maybe ask them, do they have an existing website, right? So let's do a paragraph. Let's do a strong tag. We'll do a closing strong tag, and then we'll do a closing paragraph tag. And in between the strong tag, we'll say, do you have an existing website? question mark. Oops, question mark. Now we're asking the question, do you have an existing website? Now, logic tells us that they can only select one of two options here, right? It can either be a yes or a no. So let's do a paragraph tag. And I'm going to copy this and paste it below. So we've got two of them. Then in here, we want to do, let's say we do you have an existing website? Yes or no. Now if I save this and refresh it, we'll see yes and no option here. But really we want to have a what we call a radio button. And a radio button means that they can only select one of these two options, right? So we'll do input type radio. And we do the same here as well. So let me type it in this time. Input type radio. Now you can see these radio buttons. But there's still a problem here. They can select both of them at the same time. We don't want that. We don't want them to either select yes or no, one or the other. So to do that, we need to give these fields an attribute. And the name, we need to give it a name attribute. And the name attribute needs to be the same for both of them, so that the browser can detect that this radio button can only be one of two options. So let's call this website yes, no. That will be the name of these two fields. Now when we refresh and we select yes, or if we select no, then yes gets deselected. So now they can only select one of these two, right? And the reason that's working like that is because we gave it a name attribute with the same name. So the browser will detect that these are connected together and the user can only select one of them. And now we can see our drop down menu, because we've added more stuff below. The drop down menu is going downwards rather than upwards like before. If we were to move up the browser, then it will show above. And when we've got more space below for it to be shown, it will show below. Okay. So, let's ask the customer to write us a generic message. So here you can see please enter comments. This is like a text area. This is what we call a text area field. So let's say to the customer, paragraph strong, let's do this right. Please enter your message. Let's save this and refresh. Now we've got a field or a title here called please enter your message. And underneath that title, we want to create a text area. A text area. And we want to give it a name. We'll call it message. And we need to close our text area. Let's refresh this. Now we've got this text area, right? It's pretty small. In most modern browsers, you can now like stretch the text area. You can stretch it, so the browser will know that this is a text area and allow the customer to stretch it to type in more. But it would probably be nice if we can maybe put something like row equals, let's say, how many rows? 10 rows? That might be okay. 10 rows. Refresh. 10 rows seems to be a bit small. So let's try 20. So there's something wrong here. We need to type in rows with an S. Let's try 10 again. Now we've got 10 rows. So rows with an S here. Even small things like typing in row, that won't work. So you've got to get your naming convention or the attribute names correct, or it just won't work. But if you were to put this into the validator, do you remember we looked at the validator in the previous tutorial? If it was missing an S, the validator would have picked that up and it would have flagged that as an error, and you could have checked it and fixed it that way. But maybe it's a bit too narrow, or the width is not enough, so let's try and make it wider. So we can make it wider using another feature called cols, which is like for columns, and we want to make that something like 30. Let's put an equals there. Now it's a bit wider, or you could set it to 40 and it'll be a bit more wider, so something like this. That is a nice little bit of space for them to type. And then in here you could write something like, please enter a message. You don't have to do this here. Then that text will be inside here. Normally I wouldn't do that, right? So the customer can delete it and start typing other things, but it's kind of irrelevant to have that message in there when you've already told them above to enter a message anyway. So we can get rid of this. We don't need this. So I've messed something up here. Save it like this. Okay, that's right. So in these fields we can do there's quite a few different attributes that you can add to these fields. So here we could do something like, let me just show you a couple. Yeah, let's just show you some basic ones. So we've got placeholder. Placeholder equals enter your name and save it. Right, when I refresh, can you see it says enter your name? But when I click on the field and start typing, it will get removed. So if I haven't typed anything, if I type in Joe blogs, it will remove whatever is written in there. But if I delete it, it will show that. So if you look on my website, you see, look, please enter your name. So I don't have to have that text sitting next to it, because the field, as soon as I click on it and start typing, it will remove whatever's written in there. You can see. So that's one attribute that we can add, and we wouldn't need this anymore here. But attributes we're going to come back to later in a more advanced tutorial, where we actually start to make this form functional. Let's say I'm going to show you some basic example in a moment of how this form might work. So what are we missing? The customer fills all of this in, but there's no button. They need some sort of button, right, to press to submit this form. So let's put a button down here. So just before this ending tag, we're going to do a paragraph. Let's put it in a paragraph tag, so it will be on its own line. And we'll do an input type. Input type equals submit. Now we've got a button here, submit. Right? Now this button, we can change what it says inside, and we can give it a value equals get a free quote. Let's save that. Now it says get a free quote. You can change that. Now this form doesn't work. Normally what would happen is, after we've programmed this form, we've made it look all beautiful in CSS and it's looking really nice, we'll use something like PHP, which is a different programming language. I'm going to go through some examples of that later, where we'll be able to press that button and then PHP will look at this information in the form, compile it into an email, and then send that to you. There's a few other ways of doing it as well, and we'll have to look at that in more advanced tutorials later. But we can look at one other thing quickly. If we go to the very top, we've got this form field here, and we can do action equals, and normally what you would do is in between these brackets you would put in your PHP, you would put a link to the PHP file, the path to it. So PHP is different from HTML. You can see that these files are called .html. There's another programming language called PHP, and PHP will allow us to do loads of different things. It's an amazing language, yeah. It's not even that difficult to learn, and it's actually been built specifically for web development. So HTML is all about getting the content into the page. CSS is all about making that page look really, really nice. So the visual side of it, I had to lay things out and make the fields look really nice, and all the text and all the pictures and the layout. And then PHP is a programming language which allows us to add some functionality to the page. So when we press the submit button, it does something, or when we click on an image, it will do something, right? Functionality. But for now, as a basic example, let's try and get this button to do something. So when we click on it now, why don't we try and get it to go to my website, for example, yeah? So we could say action equals, so when someone presses the button, we want them to go to https://www.dcpweb.co.uk. So if we save this and refresh it, when they fill out this form, they'll click submit. I mean, in reality, what would normally happen is this information will be collected and then it will be packaged into an email and sent to you as the owner of the website. But when we click the get a free quote button now, it goes to my website. But I just wanted to show you the action function here. That's quite an important function, because we can replace now this HTTP DCP web with another script that will process this data. And there's really a fourth tool that I normally use, and that's called MySQL, and that's a database piece of software. So we're really going quite far ahead in terms of technology, or where we would be in this tutorial, but you need to understand those four fundamental elements, right? So there's HTML, which is what we're using right now to get the base content, the bricks and mortar, you could say. Then we'll use CSS later to make it look more presentable. So we could add a background, we can change the font styles, we can, manipulate this content better using CSS. Then we can use a third tool or language, we could say, called PHP, that we can add some functionality to this project. So when they click this button, or if they fill in one of these fields, we can make them do certain actions, right? We can use PHP to do that. Then there's MySQL, which is a database. And the database is where we could store this information. So when the customer submits it, we could actually store that in the database and then email it to us. So if there's any problems with sending it via email, we retain that information in the database. Or you can almost call it like a little basic CRM. You could collect all of your customers' information into one location in a database. Then you can read that data later. You can save it and archive it, right? And then, I don't want to make this tricky for you, but there's actually another programming language called JavaScript, and JavaScript is really good for doing things in real time in the browser window. And JavaScript is supported by all web browsers. So let's say things like field validation. So if someone misses, let's say this was a required field, we could use JavaScript to make sure that this field is completed. And we could add conditions to it, like it must contain more than 2 characters. If it's first name, it mustn't contain any numbers and things like this. And we can use JavaScript to validate these fields. And when they click this get a free quote button, if these fields have errors in it, we can show errors. We can say, look, you forgot to fill in your first name. Please do that. Yeah. So when I go to my website and I click get a free quote, you can see I'm using JavaScript here to validate these fields. And I'm highlighting them in red, like you need to please enter your first name, please enter correct email, please enter your phone number, and highlight this field, like write a comment here. I could highlight this drop-down menu, you have to select something here. You must select one of these at minimum. So you can validate the form before they submit it. So that's JavaScript. And then when I do fill out this form and complete everything and I hit this submit button, I'm using PHP to process that information, store it into a database, and then send it to me in an email. So I know that sounds quite complicated. I should probably explain that, to be honest, in later tutorials, but I just want to get you up to speed so you understand that these are some of the things we're going to be doing in the near future in more advanced tutorials. Okay, so that is some basic understanding of form processing. Don't forget to save your page here. I'm going to close this and close this, and I look forward to seeing you in the next DCP web tutorial.